Next up, I will give a word to Will Allred, co-founder at Lavender and LinkedIn top sales voice.
I want to talk more about what does it actually mean to become a better writer. We'll talk about some key principles for better writing, and I'm going to talk about frameworks. Writing is a key aspect of the sales process. Good writing means you're a good thinker.
Okay, I will speed it up. Next up, I will give a word to Will Allred, co-founder at Lavender and LinkedIn top sales voice. Together with his team, Will is building the ultimate sales assistant tool that helps sales teams write better emails faster. So, Will, putting mic to you, and I will, go on front.
Vlad, I appreciate it. Appreciate the kind words. Let me pull up my slides here. Go up. Can y'all see them? Can't necessarily see if y'all can see them. Yep, there they are. Okay, cool. So today what we're going to talk about is what does it mean to turn SDRs into better writers? This is a topic I'm obviously passionate about, and so I'm excited to dig in. If you don't know me, as Vlad mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders at a company called Lavender. We see literally millions of emails every single month across 10,000 plus users. So we have access to data that really nobody else is even thinking about when it comes to what does it mean to write a quality cold email. And as a byproduct of that, it's enabled us to help level up the writing skills of a lot of different reps. And so, when I think about the agenda today, I don't want necessarily to go into what does it mean to write a good cold email. I think that matters, and it's a good conversation. I want to talk more about what does it actually mean to become a better writer. And so first things first, we're going to talk about why that matters, because I think there's sort of two camps of sales leaders, and more sales leaders are falling into this, writing is important camp. But I want to make sure we spend some time talking about why it actually does matter. So it all kind of starts back with the why, right? We'll talk about some key principles for better writing. I've got 3 lined up that really help just put it into perspective. I'm going to talk about frameworks. So, you think about writing quality email and you think about templates, etc., right? Templates are, it's a nice thing when it comes to scale, but things have to change, things have to adjust, and having frameworks that support and back up your templates is really going to change the way you think about writing. And then we're going to finish up with some exercises. So when I think about how can we actually put this into practice, it actually requires practice, but thoughtful practice. And so I'm going to talk through some particular exercises that we as sellers can do to up our game. So this is sort of going back to that 2 camps of sales, right? I heard this the other day from a sales leader, and I almost spit out my coffee because I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't hire these sales reps to write. I hired them to sell. And I'm like, what do you think they do all day? Sales is writing, whether you're putting together the contract, you're shooting DMs, you're following up with individuals, you're multi-threading. All of these different things involve writing. It is crucial to the job. And so to say sales isn't writing is a bit of an insult to the actual day-to-day of the role, right? It harkens back to this time in which people viewed, I'll point to email, right? They viewed email as this tool for warming an account before you picked up the phone and called them. That game is over, right? And so we know that writing is a key aspect of the sales process. The other thing with writing is good writing means you're a good thinker. I'm a huge proponent of this, as an exercise, right? Whenever I write a weekly newsletter, right? And the reason I do it, I don't promote it very often. I don't talk about it very often. The reason I do it is because it's a time allotment for me to actually flesh out my ideas on a particular topic. And what I find is because I force myself to write about it, force myself to send it to people, a bit of accountability there. What it does is it actually helps me clarify my thinking, because I have to put it on paper, and then I read through it and I'm like, this has to go to 2,000 plus people, right? And all of a sudden I'm like, is that clear? Are people actually going to understand what I mean? Because we think about topics, right? And we'll be like, oh, yeah, I think I get that conceptually. But then you start to write about it and you start to poke holes, you start to see things, right? And I think one of the main challenges with this idea of like, I'm just going to send over some information about what we do, is there's not like a clear point of logic. There's not like actual clear thought as to why I'm showing up here, why I'm selling to them. And so when we think about like rep development, when we think about actual like scaling up a team, right? We want our sellers to move from this like SDR role into this AE role and like continue to expand. Well, that starts at the front, right? It starts with a clear, logical reason for why we're showing up and why we're having this conversation with somebody. And so I like to focus writing in this, little narrow stretch of time we have here on cold outbound. Because if you think about cold outbound, it's where the relationship is going to begin, right? If you think about what good cold outbound does, is it showcases clear logic for why you're showing up and having a conversation with somebody. It's also the easiest place to drive results, right? You look across a sales funnel, the hardest place to drive results is on the front end, actually getting the conversation started. But those cold email skills, because, right, we're starting with this, like why we're actually showing up and having a conversation with this individual, it requires us to be able to take missing information and pull together a logical argument for why an argument should happen, right? Those cold email skills actually transfer really well throughout the organization. At the simplest level, if we start with cold outbound, clear writing is going to mean that you generate more pipeline and more revenue for your business. So when I think about like more revenue, right, we can actually quantify this. And like all of the exercises and practices that I come back to, right, it comes back to data. So this is data that we have on our end where we actually see the clarity of your writing has a massive impact on your chance of generating response rates. So most emails are written at or beyond a 10th grade reading level. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I talk about this all the time because it's something that just doesn't change. And it stems back to like the way you're taught to write in school. It stems back to this weird desire to build credibility through jargon and, sounding smart. And in reality, you don't sound smart. You sound misunderstood. And so, this focus on clarity really matters when it comes to generating more response, right? So why clear writing? Well, it creates a better sales org all around because you're going to generate better reps, right? The reps themselves are going to have clear lines of thinking. They are going to help generate more pipeline and ultimately more growth for the business, right? I think about that classic, like, what if I train my reps and then they leave me? And it's like, well, what if we don't train them and they stay, right? It's the same mindset of if I teach my reps how to write, clarify their thinking in ways that other people can understand, you are going to generate a sales org that is just overall better. So let's talk about some key principles for what better writing looks like. So the number one thing that I tell folks to focus on, the reader is the most important thing, the audience, right? But when we write messaging, when we write sales emails in particular, the challenge is we don't actually know how decision makers go through their inbox. We don't think about it. And so we have to recognize their inbox is a bit of a to-do list. And so the average amount of time that they're going to spend with your message is about 10 seconds. And most of the time they're deleting it within like 3, right? So like this is where your audience is coming from. That's where they're at, right? And so if you're thinking about what does that mean, well, think back to your own experience, right? If you're spending 10 seconds with an email, what are you thinking about when you're writing an email, right? You're not actually reading to comprehend. You're reading to figure out what is this, right? It's a categorization exercise. And so you have to recognize as well like they're categorizing, but they're also, if I asked y'all to pick up your phone, right? Like your phone's probably right here next to you. It's a mobile experience as well. So there's like all of these different aspects that come together. And if you just don't like even think about it, right? All of a sudden you create this like terrible experience for the end reader because you've just been writing within your own little world, and then all of a sudden you send them like a giant wall of text that they're not going to read, and you wouldn't read it either. And like on the same point of like where the reader's coming from, thinking about like a follow-up email, right? This is something that like I think so many sellers miss, and it's because we have meetings every week where we talk about our buyers, we talk about our prospects, we talk about how we're trying to break into the account, and they don't think about you at all. And so when you're thinking about the perspective of your buyer, right, they are completely removed from your follow-up. They haven't thought about you between the emails like you have. And it's just one other way in which we are failing as writers to recognize the experience of the reader on the other end. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about logic. So the way that logic shows up in your writing, right, is each sentence should naturally transition to the next. And the problem is like a lot of sellers will I'm trying to think of like they'll sort of like block things together, right? And it doesn't necessarily transition well. And the place this typically comes up is like the personalization. I saw you raise funding. I saw you're at Brave Stand, and then like it turns into this anyways type discussion, right? And like as a reader, I can see right through it, right? I'm like, okay, like you pulled in this like fake information, and then you really just use it as an excuse to pitch me, right? It's not a logical flow. Sure, you can like relate a personal hobby like kayaking back to like navigating the rapids of sales transformation or something, right? But like the problem is most sellers aren't actually able to do that in practice at scale. And so it's one of these things that creates this weird blocky experience. The other challenge that sellers are going to have when they're trying to create this logic is you have to be really brief with your writing, right? So if somebody's spending 10 seconds with your message, how do you line up these conversational touch points in a way that is easy to digest, right? 10 seconds only means they're going to read about 40 words. And if you look at the data, that actually relates back to when you get better responses, which makes sense, right? If they read the entire message, they're more likely to respond to it. But like we've all experienced that weird choppy flow within a message. I think the other piece that's kind of hard if like I'm bringing in something that's kind of irrelevant. So going back, right? If I'm bringing in, saw you're a Braves fan, right? That's going to take a lot more work, aka a lot more words, to get them to fall within this like range of like having a logical, normal conversation. And thus I'm going to fall out of this optimal range for getting a response. So you think about the logic, right? Every sentence needs to lead to the next. I need to be able to say more with less. And that kind of comes back to a lot of what we're using on the front end for personalization. It needs to be actually interesting, relevant information. And like we have to have, again, that empathy for that reader's experience, right? They're kind of skimming through this information. And so they have to be able to easily capture it upon like a quick glance. So what's the easiest way to do this? The easiest way, in my opinion, to help folks create these logical flows, to help folks create these short, clear messages, is to use frameworks. And the reason I'm a big fan of frameworks is because frameworks actually teach you why things are happening within your message, right? You think about a template, right? And this is how most reps are onboarded. You come in and you're given, hey, like this is your template that you're going to send. Like, please personalize it because like personalized emails get twice as many responses. right? And the problem with that is they don't actually know why each piece of that template exists, right? They don't understand what's going on there. And so instead of giving them a template, give them a framework. So this is like my all-time favorite framework. Like everyone should just like take a screenshot of this because it's going to drive a lot of responses. And it's pretty simple, right? You make an observation, you tie that observation back to a problem or an insight, you lend some credibility to speak to the observation and problem that you're observing. You then explain very clearly what you do to solve that problem, and then you provide a interest-based CTA. Maybe even a better way to describe this to a new rep would be you open it up for conversation, right? That's way clearer than interest-based CTA, which is just industry jargon. But like, how does that come to life, right? So back to this like teaching process, you show them how that actually comes to life. The other piece that I think is really key is like understanding why these like frameworks are really helpful. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. These frameworks can be really helpful because one, it showcases opportunity for flexibility. So if you think about like parts 1 and 2, make an observation, problem based on that observation. That is a very flexible frame. I can apply that to pretty much anyone's email, right? You can drop an email in the chat and I can rework it into this framework. And that's key in a world where personalization is so crucial to driving response, right? The other piece is like all of these aspects are super flexible. And so I can apply them to a number of different situations. The other thing with flexibility comes the ability to test, right? The ability to run experiments in a thoughtful way, right? If you ask a rep to A/B test today, like their response is like, oh, I changed the CTA and I asked a different question at the end, or like I brought in different value props, or yeah, I changed a couple words here and there. That's basically what I see when I talk to reps. I've done thousands of one-on-one coaching sit downs, by the way. Most aren't even doing that. The actually how you should be thinking about this testing, right, is each piece of the puzzle is something that you can move around. It's something that you can replace. It's something that you can change. It's something that you can get really micro with, or it's something you can get really macro with, right? So let's look at actually how this framework comes to life. So it starts with an observation. That observation moves into an insight. That insight has a problem associated with it. From that problem, we explain that we can help with that, and we bring it open for conversation, right? Super simple, but all of that comes together in a way that is really quick to digest. You can follow the logic really easily. It's under 50 words, and it's written at a 5th grade reading level. So let me talk about some of the writing practices that I put into place in order to make that the case. If you look at each of these lines, each of them could be a sentence in and of themselves, right? What I've done is I've actually intentionally gone through and broken up each sentence so that it reads really choppy. And what that does is it makes it easier for the reader to scan with their eyes. It also lowers that reading level score. It increases the clarity of that message because it's easier for a net new individual to come in and understand it, right? But all of these aspects can be traded out. They can be swapped around. So I could say, hey, George, usually I'm seeing customers leaning on templates, but finding their reps are plateauing. Given you're hiring for SDRs, I'm guessing you're already thinking about, how those new reps will ramp, right? All I did was just move things around. And that's something I could easily A/B test and see if it's more effective. I don't think it would be more effective, but the point being is the framework itself, everything becomes a building block that you can play with, that you can toy with, you can move, you can adjust. And that is way more impactful for a net new rep, right? So if I'm onboarding a new rep and I'm showcasing this framework, I'm showcasing how it's come to life. One of the most underutilized things within a sales organization is the new perspective of that seller that is coming in, right? They are bringing their own world of experiences, their own like way of seeing the world. When you give them a template, you absolutely crush their ability to be creative and showcase their personality for your brand. And so by giving them a framework, by giving them something like this, what you do is you set them up for success, right? If I tell a rep, I say, hey, bring an observation to the table and then ask them a question that basically implies that we have something that can solve for it, right? Little to no pitch. I refer to it as mousetrap, right? Like, how creative could they be, right? Like, hey, I saw you joined my session on email writing. With the team's growth, would it be helpful to see what's holding back new reps' email performance, right? Like, that implies that the team at Lavender has a solution for that, of course. But like, what if I gave this to a rep and said, go blast this out, versus I gave this to a rep and I said, go think about how you could potentially do this. One of the things that I find really fascinating is this idea of called like a dummy curve. And dummy curve is a really funny idea of when somebody is like net new to an organization. They don't necessarily know a lot, right? So what happens is they distill down things into a really simple way. And back to that simplicity, that works really well in messaging. And so again, it's another opportunity that we are totally missing out on. So instead of using these templates, we are going to lean into frameworks because frameworks are flexible. They offer smarter A/B tests, but it also offers the organization the opportunity to tap into how the rep themselves think and how they can be creative. So especially as we enter a recession, and we think about, the old tricks just aren't working the way they need to. We need to move to a more flexible framework-driven approach so that we can continue to drive results. So let's talk about some data-informed exercises, and then we can open up for Q&A. I'm seeing a few in there about follow-up frequency and stuff in the chat. We can talk about that in Q&A. I actually want to talk about some writing practices. So if you look at the data, right, one of the first things I mentioned was clarity is really, really important. So like how the heck do you write a clearer message? How do you reduce this reading level down? It's becoming more and more important within our writing. So how do we approach that? Well, clarity within your writing is a byproduct of the number of syllables per word, per sentence, and per paragraph, right? So what we're basically calculating is how much of a mouthful is this exact statement. And when you think about that, it's measured in syllables. It's measured, syllables. That's a long one. And so the ways to approach this thoughtfully, I sort of showcased this in the first framework, was removing commas from our writing. An easy way to think about it, long sentence equal lost readers. Because their eyes are only going to scan. And so as the idea sort of like drones along, people get lost and they pull out. And so, thinking about a writing exercise that ties back to the data, well, shortening up your sentences is a way to reduce syllable count per sentence, right? And so commas are typically used to conjoin ideas. And so if we just remove them from our writing, that's an easy way to make our writing feel, there's a music term called staccato, right? Where it feels very choppy, very abrupt. And that's what we're approaching when we're trying to write quality emails, right? And it all just comes back to the data that's informing this, right? If long, windy, complicated messages were the key, right, then this wouldn't be the exercise, but it ties back to what we see. So here's an example, right? So before, we'd say something like, we're helping reps at Sendoso ramp faster and they continue improving with their in-inbox assistant. But a simple change makes all the difference in your ability to scan that information. We're helping reps at Sendoso ramp faster. They continue improving with their in-inbox assistant. Now, it's because of that, just breakup, it's easier to scan, it's easier to absorb, and we find it actually increases your chance of getting a response. Now, the other thing that is driving your reading level score, the lack of clarity that people have for your message, are actually the words you use. This one gets a little bit harder because you actually have to make some hard decisions and you have to think. So look at like some of the emails you've been sending out. Look at some of the templates you've been using. There are probably longer words that you've been using with like 3+ syllables. Try the exercise of banning them. And so a good example would be visibility. It is really easy for me to talk about inbox visibility. It's probably easy for one of y'all to talk about flexibility, or I don't know why they all kind of time back to ability, but there's longer words that we tend to use, right? Maybe personalization would be a good example. I'll use visibility here. So before, Lavender gives teams visibility across their inboxes. It seems fine, right? But it is a little jargony. It's a little like dense. And so instead of using a word like that, let's try to find a way to replace it. And so the question you ask yourself is, what am I trying to say? What is actually happening here when I talk about this? And so the after is Lavender lets you see what works across inboxes, right? I said the same thing, but I did it in these like shorter, more calculated words that are actually easier to understand. And it's funny, right? Because like since I didn't use the jargon, it actually gives the message much more meaning when you read it on a quick glance. And so like visibility kind of ties back to being able to see shorter words, better efficacy. Another word that you can just like ban from your vocab is the word leverage, right? There's really no other opportunity. Like just replace it with the word use or use, right? And like you're saying basically the same thing in just like fewer words. And back to this like fewer words point, right? Fewer words equal more replies. And so what's an easy way to shorten up your message? Well, my favorite is to try to force people to put a tweet, put your email into a tweet, and like the bigger challenge, like adding your subject line to it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I tried this, like putting this deck together, and I was like, oh man, this is actually really hard. And like I found myself with this like weird choice matrix of like, what do I pull out? What do I replace? How do I rephrase this, right? Because I wanted to make sure I've used an example where I actually put the subject line in there, right? And so it's not impossible. You just have to work with it and like say, okay, what am I actually trying to say here? How can I say it with less words? And so it's not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. So in summary, what I'm trying to get at is better sellers are better writers because they're better thinkers, right? They're approaching these conversations in a way where they are going to be heard because they're approaching it from the reader's perspective. They're going to be understood because they're laying out clean logic. They're brief, they're clear, but they're always iterating, right? So like understanding why behind a lot of the messaging is super key in order to creating better messaging over time. And as you think about like ways to practice and get better, right? This is like my favorite, right? Coming up with like fun activities for our team as well as other teams to try based on the data, right? Maybe your data is like, I see this with a lot of teams, like 0 questions works really well. And how do you write questions in a way that aren't questions? How do you generate response that way? And like having exercises where you just come up with like different CTAs the team can try. It's just different writing exercises that everybody can get to using and try out. So hopefully this session was informative. I'm happy to stick around and ask questions, but I also know that we have another session popping up soon.
Yes, hi, Will. Apologies, we got a bit delayed with your presentation. Thank you for really nice insights. I personally find the framework approach opposite the template one super helpful. That's what I try to do with my reps as well. So thank you for that. We did have some amazing questions. We'll share them with you. If you could please stick around for a few more minutes to answer in chat, that would be great.
I'm happy to.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. It was a pleasure, Will. Thanks.
Yeah.